Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I've been working as a ring technician for WWE for almost 15 years now. It's a job that doesn't leave much room for glamour. It's sweat, duct tape, and long nights hauling gear under unforgiving lights. But I love it. You see the world. You hear the roar of the crowd. You become a small, invisible part of something so much bigger. And sometimes you see things you can't explain. It happened in Kansas City. The arena was one of those older places built back in the 60s, back when they didn't care as much about making things shiny and accessible. It had creaky wooden floors that groaned under your weight, walls that smelled faintly of mildew, and lights that buzzed like angry hornets when they flickered. We were there for a big event. I don't even remember which one now. The schedule was the same as always. Unload, set up, test, adjust, repeat. By midnight, most of the crew had called it a night, leaving just a skeleton staff behind to wrap up the small stuff. I was one of the skeletons. I stayed late to double-check the pyro rigging. Nothing unusual about that. Pyro malfunctions are no joke, and I'd rather lose sleep than risk someone getting their eyebrows singed, or worse. The ring was already set, glowing faintly under the work lights. The rest of the arena was a cavernous darkness, the kind that swallows sound. That's when I noticed him. At first, I thought it was security, some guard who dozed off in the front row. He was slouched in his seat, head tilted down like he was trying to disappear into his hoodie. But there was something wrong. The way he sat, like his bones didn't quite fit together the way they should. "Hey," I called out, my voice bouncing off the empty seats. "You're not supposed to be here." Nothing. I stepped closer, and the overhead lights flickered like they were debating whether to go out completely. My boots echoed on the concrete as I approached. "Security's gonna throw you out, man," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "You hear me?" He didn't move. Not at first, and then he did. Slowly, his head turned toward me, and that's when I saw his face, or what should have been his face. His skin was pale, almost see-through, and his eyes, God, his eyes. They weren't eyes at all, just empty black pits that seemed to stretch forever. I froze. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The figure stood up, his movements jerky, like a marionette with half its strings cut. He started walking toward the ring, one slow, deliberate step at a time. "Hey, stop." My voice cracked, barely above a whisper, and then, just as his foot touched the edge of the ring, the lights cut out completely. Total darkness swallowed the arena, and I swear to God, I felt him standing right in front of me, even though I couldn't see a damn thing. When the lights came back on, he was gone. I didn't wait to see if he'd come back. I left my tools, my gear, everything, and bolted for the nearest exit. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to break out of my chest. The next morning, I told a few of the guys what I'd seen. Most of them laughed it off, like I'd spent too much time inhaling smoke from the pyro machines. But then an older guy, a janitor who'd been working the arenas longer than I'd been alive, pulled me aside. "You saw him, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "Oh," I asked, though I already knew I didn't want the answer. The Shadow, he said. He's been around for years, since the 80s at least. Always in the front row. Always watching the ring. Some folks say he used to be a wrestler who died in the ring. Others say he's something else entirely. Something older. I shook my head. You're messing with me. But he wasn't smiling. You're lucky, kid. He doesn't always let people walk away. I haven't stayed late at an arena since. Whenever we're packing up after a show, and I see those flickering lights or hear the creak of the floorboards, I feel a cold shiver run down my spine. I tell myself it's just my imagination, just a trick of the mind. But deep down, I know better. And every so often, when I look out at the front row during a show, I swear I catch a glimpse of someone sitting there. Someone who wasn't on the ticket list. Watching. Waiting. For what, I don't know. And I pray I never find out. Story 2. You never think much about where you're staying on a wrestling tour. Hotels blur together, city after city, as long as the bed's clean and there's hot water. But I'll never forget that place in Vienna, and not because of the 5-star treatment. We were booked at this old, Gothic-style hotel. The kind of place that looked like it belonged in a Dracula movie. The stone facade had gargoyles perched above the door, and the lobby. Oh, the lobby reeked of age, with dusty chandeliers that barely lit the cracked marble floors. A lot of the guys joked about it. I bet this place was a hospital back in the day. One of the rookies said. Turns out he was right. During the war, it had been converted into a makeshift hospital for the wounded. People whispered about how the basement had been used as a morgue. But wrestlers are a superstitious bunch, and we laughed it off. That night, I was assigned to share a locker room with 2 other guys for our show prep. The venue was old too, one of those crumbling arenas that felt like it had seen more blood than just the scripted kind. I got there early, wanted to take my time taping up. The moment I walked into the room, I knew something was off. It was cold, not the kind of cold where you shrug and grab a jacket. This was bone deep, unnatural. And here's the kicker. The radiator in the corner was on full blast. I muttered, rubbing my hands together. I'm not one to spook easily, but something about that chill made the hair on my arms stand up. I set my gear down on the bench and glanced at the mirrors lining the far wall. They were fogged up, like someone had just taken a steamy shower. Except the room didn't smell of damp towels or soap. It smelled stale, like old wood and something faintly metallic. That's when I saw it. A single word scrawled in the condensation. Leave. I blinked, my breath hitching. My first thought was it had to be a prank. Maybe one of the guys had gotten here early and thought it'd be funny to freak me out. Real funny, guys, I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No answer. I grabbed a towel from my bag and wiped the mirror clean, shaking my head. Wrestlers loved pulling pranks, but this felt different, darker. I pushed the thought away and sat down to lace my boots, forcing myself to focus on the routine. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl came from the back of the room, near the showers. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It was deep, wet, almost like something gurgling. I froze, my fingers pausing mid-lace. Hello, I called out, my voice trembling despite myself. No answer. The growl came again, but this time it shifted, morphing into something worse. A laugh. It was low and raspy, the kind of laugh that sounded like it didn't come from a human throat. It sent a bolt of ice straight down my spine. I shot up from the bench, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" The door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I spun around and ran for it, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My palms slicked with sweat as I pounded on the door. "Hey, let me out." The lights flickered overhead, casting the room into strobing shadows. I heard someone moving behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I didn't want to turn around, but some terrible force compelled me. From the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, no, a thing, was crawling along the ceiling. Its limbs were long and spindly, bending in ways that defied logic. It had no face, just smooth, pale skin where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. Yet somehow, I knew it was watching me. I stumbled backward, my knees buckling. The thing moved closer, its body contorting grotesquely, its hollow face tilting as if it were curious about me. The lights flickered again, and for one merciful second, it disappeared. When the lights came back on, it was right in front of me. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I'm a big guy. I've taken steel chairs to the back and been slammed through tables, but this was terror on a whole new level. The lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. I felt something cold and slimy brush against my arm, and then the door flew open with a loud creak. Light from the hallway spilled in, and just like that, the oppressive cold was gone. The room was empty. I didn't stick around to find out what would happen next. I grabbed my gear and bolted, not stopping until I reached the main hall where the rest of the crew was setting up. The next day, I asked the venue manager about the locker room. His face went pale. "That room," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's supposed to stay locked. No one's used it in years." He wouldn't say why, but I didn't need him to. I knew some things are better left locked away, and some places, they remember. I've been to a lot of arenas since that night, but I'll never forget that locker room in Vienna. Even now, I can't walk into a cold room without my stomach twisting into knots, because sometimes the past isn't as dead as we'd like to think. Sometimes it's waiting, watching, crawling along the ceiling. Story 3. They say the gorilla position, the spot just behind the entrance curtain, is the heartbeat of any WWE event. I've always thought of it as more of a pressure cooker. It's where legends are made, where egos clash, and where the whole show rides on a razor-thin edge of timing. I've been around wrestling long enough to know the energy there can sometimes feel electric, like you're standing too close to a storm. But that night in Detroit, it felt different. Wrong, like the air itself was alive, buzzing with something unseen. I was filling in as a backstage producer for the night, which meant managing talent, keeping an eye on cues, and basically making sure the show didn't go off the rails. I'd worked in the business for years, but this was my first time handling things at this level. Maybe that's why I dismissed the feeling at first. I chalked it up to nerves. Rookie mistake. The show started smoothly enough. The first match was underway, and the crowd was eating it up. I was watching the monitors when I noticed her. A woman, standing just beyond the screens, almost hidden in the shadows. She wasn't on the run sheet, and I didn't recognize her as part of the crew. She wore an old-school wrestling outfit, the kind you'd see in black and white photos of the 50s or 60s. Her hair was pinned up, tight and neat, like she was ready for a match. But it was her face that struck me the most. It wasn't the kind of beauty you'd see on today's WWE roster. It was hollow. Her eyes were wide and vacant, like she was looking through me rather than at me. And then she smiled. It wasn't a warm, friendly smile. It was the kind of smile you see on someone who knows a secret you don't, a secret you wouldn't want to know. It made my stomach twist. I cleared my throat. Hey, are you supposed to be here? My voice came out shakier than I intended. She didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her head like she was sizing me up. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the curtain. My heart leapt into my throat. No one was scheduled to go out yet. If she broke the timing, it could throw the whole match into chaos. Hey, wait, I called, rushing after her. But by the time I reached the curtain, she was gone. I stared out into the arena. The match was still going on, the wrestlers oblivious to my panic. I scanned the crowd, the ring, the ramp, but there was no sign of her. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. When I got back to Gorilla, the production team was buzzing. One of the camera operators turned to me, his face pale. "Did you see that?" "See what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He pointed at the monitors. She walked right through the curtain. We caught it on camera for a second, but then she just disappeared. Light gone. A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at the screens, but there was nothing unusual. Just the match, unfolding like normal. I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every shadow. When the show finally wrapped, I pulled an older WWE employee aside. He'd been around forever, the kind of guy who'd seen it all. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be him. I described the woman to him, down to the eerie smile. His reaction was immediate. His face went pale, and his hands started to tremble. You saw Clara Monroe," he whispered. The name didn't ring a bell. "Oh, she was a wrestler, back in the 60s, a real trailblazer. People loved her." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She died in Detroit, right in the middle of a match. Heart attack, they said, but some folks think it was something darker. She'd been complaining about feeling watched, like someone was waiting for her. She said it felt like the ring didn't want her there anymore. I felt my mouth go dry. What happened to her? They say her spirit never left. Some people claim to see her, always near the ring, like she's waiting for a match that never came." He looked at me, his eyes serious. "Don't stay too close to Gorilla late at night. Just don't." I didn't need to be told twice. I finished my work as quickly as I could and got out of there. But the image of her, that hollow smile, those vacant eyes, stayed with me. Weeks later, I heard another story. A young wrestler claimed he saw a woman in old-fashioned gear watching him from the rafters during his match. He thought it was a fan at first, but she wasn't there when the match ended. Others had similar tales. A fleeting glimpse of a woman who didn't belong, always near the ring. Now, whenever I'm backstage, I can't help but glance over my shoulder. The Gorilla position feels different to me now. It's not just the heartbeat of the show, it's something else, something alive. And every so often, out of the corner of my eye, I think I see her. Watching. Waiting. I've stopped staying late after shows. Just in case.